again for WranglerForum.com. Today we're working on the Unlimited project, and we're going to be installing a Rancho 2-inch progressive lift kit along with their geo-correction bracket. So let me show you what's in the lift before we get started. Of course, it comes with front and rear coil springs, and these are progressive. And that means that at the top of the spring, the coils are a little bit closer spaced together versus the rest of the spring body itself. And that's supposed to help over more rough rides, give you a little bit more confident ride when you go and do that. It also includes the adjustable 9-way shocks, the RS9000s, and then also we picked up these geo-correction brackets. And these help with the front suspension. It puts everything back in the proper line to allow you to have a more confident steering with it. And of course it comes with the hardware and brackets to do all that with it. So let's get started on the install. I'm going to start this lift in the back of the Jeep for one simple reason. It's a little less complex than starting on the front. Back here we're going to go ahead and unloosen the several bolts, the shock bolts, the track bar bolt, the sway bar links. That's all going to allow the axle to drop once we get the Jeep up in the air a little bit. Make things a lot simpler and easier. Again, it's a fairly simple install. We're just going to replace the existing shocks and the springs. We don't have to worry about control arms or adjustable control arms, anything like that. So that's why we're starting in the back. Pretty simple to start with, and I'm going to go ahead and start loosening some of these bolts up as soon as I go out of here. So right now I'm just continuing to loosen up different bolts and parts on the Jeep. I just took the bolt out of the brake line bracket that goes on the frame. Again, as we lower everything down, we want to make sure that none of this stuff gets stretched too far, rip the brake line off to the caliper, anything along those lines. So we've dropped the axle down, or I've dropped the axle down, I guess. Nobody's really helping me. We've got to the point now where we can get the spring out, hopefully. And so there is our stock spring. This is the isolator up top. You're going to reuse this when you put the new spring in. And then, of course, we'll attach the shocks and then get everything bolted back up, and we'll be done with the rear. Wasn't too bad, actually. So real quick, just wanted to show you the differences in springs. This is the new spring, Rancho spring we're going to be putting in, and this is the stock spring I just took out. Some differences you see right away. Not really a lot height difference, but the diameter of the coil, as well as the number of coils compared to the old and the new spring. So I was able to get the new spring in, not a problem. What I ended up doing, because I was concerned about this line, which is the line for the locker, is that it was getting a little bit tight and I couldn't quite get the clip out on it to release it. So I went ahead and used another hydraulic jack over on this side to push up that side of the axle, which then allowed me to go ahead and lower this a little bit more for the needed space to get the new spring in. So we can probably do the same thing on the other side as well, make things a little bit easier, and then from there it's just adding the shocks and then reattaching all the hardware, and hopefully none of it's rolled away like happens a lot. At this point, we have everything back and reassembled. Shocks are in, springs are in, track bars reassembled, sway bar links are all in, brake line bracket relocations are put in, everything is tightened down. One thing I'm doing right now is kind of dropping the axle down now to see exactly how tight everything would become if I let it go to the maximum drop. Of course, the tires aren't on right now, but this gives us a good idea, and this is something you should do to see if anything like brake lines are going to be overly stretched, or if you do have the locker on yours, make sure the cable to that isn't going to get stretched or pinched as well. Right now, this is about the lowest I'm going to drop it. You can kind of see here, maybe not, but the vent line for the axle tube is just starting to separate from the little the tab on there. Brake lines look fine, plenty of room in those to go down several more inches, not a problem. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I'm going to button everything up, and then we'll go ahead and eventually get the front started. So this morning we're going to be finishing up this lift kit, and that means doing the front suspension. The back went together really well. I was very surprised how easy it was to put together. The front's going to be just a little bit more involved because we have the geo-correction brackets, and what those do is help with caster. And caster is what happens when you lift the vehicle. That front axle housing can rotate, okay? And a lot of times that issue is solved by adjustable control arms, because you can adjust the length of those arms, which then adjust the rotation of the axle. These geo brackets are said to go ahead and take into account for that. And depending on where you place them on the bracket, the control arm, it will help adjust the caster for you. So we'll find out. So I guess I'll go get started. Here in the front, I've got the tires off. I've disconnected the track bar, getting ready to disconnect the sway bar links. We'll move on to the drive shaft after that. One thing I did want to point out, if you don't have a second hydraulic jack like I was working with yesterday, you can use the factory jack. It's a little bit slower, not quite as solid as non-hydraulic jack, but in a pinch you can definitely make do with that. One other thing you can do is put your lug nuts back on the axle studs or wheel studs so you don't go ahead and lose them later when you're trying to put the tires back on. So I'm just going to dive into the rest of this and start working on these sway bar links right over here. This is a geo correction bracket, and what this does is allows you to drop your control arms down further, which are back in here, top and lower control arm, down to maintain the proper angles, help with caster, as I said before. And these just bolt in place. It's a one-piece design, just bolts in place of the rear bolts on the Jeep frame, and they go in. A little bit bulky, certainly not the easiest thing to handle by yourself with one hand when you're there trying to undo everything, but they do work from what we've heard. So I'm going to get in there and start unbolting this stuff. Got the spring out, obviously. You can do it with the spring in. If you already have a Jeep that's lifted, they say you can leave the spring in and do it as well. Just with the spring out right now, it's a little bit easier to up and down the axle to align everything. So we'll see how it goes. Bump stops, very important. This is an extended bump stop. It's going to go here on top of the coil cup. And what that's going to do is when we have larger tires on here, is to prevent them from going up into the fenders. And how we install this is we need to drill the top of that, and then we'll go ahead and tap it, and then we'll go ahead and put a self-tapping screw in that's going to make up the rest of the tap. Something like that. Simple, easy. Lift is on. It took a little bit longer than I thought it would take, but everything finally went together okay. Got a few minor things I need to go torque down, make sure everything's properly set per the instructions, but overall it is done. It looks pretty good. In the front, I ended up getting a little bit over 2 inches, about 2 2/4, give or take, right about there. I'll have the exact measurements in the full review, which I will link at the bottom of this video. Other than that, looks pretty good. I'm going to go take it for a road test here the next day or so, see how we need to adjust those shocks, which position's best, and we'll go from there with it. Currently driving the Jeep to get a feel of how the lift kit feels compared to the stock suspension, and we're just on some slow speed roads right now to about 35 miles an hour. I'm going to get ready to turn on the highway here. Feels pretty much like I'm driving the stock Jeep. No odd sensations when we hit a bump. Jeep isn't darting one way or the other. It feels pretty solid and confident in the steering. No odd handling quirks or anything like that. No vibrations or anything that I would call odd or be concerned about. Certainly want to put some more miles on to see what happens long term, but definitely very impressed with how it is so far. I'd say if you're looking for a lift kit that's going to equate to the stock ride, that isn't a huge tall lift kit that will allow you on some larger tires, definitely put this one on your list.